Hey y'all,
What's going on, guys?
I'm Jay,
And I'm Chris the Bird Nerd.
and we
We are
are
the
the
Bird
Bird
Brains.
Brains. Oh, we were dead on my side.
And we sounded pretty
No,
good on my side too, so hopefully two for
no,
two.
and that one's toast. No way, we're gonna be a mile apart.
That's all right.
Well, we
We'll
took a
take
little
it.
break. We've had a both had a crazy end of summer,
Yeah.
and we have a big announcement we've been working on. This will be the last episode before said announcement.
Yep, just
Uh,
putting a few more details into place and hopefully we'll be
yeah,
good to go after that. So
some very exciting stuff. So, professionalizing the podcast a little bit, as professional as we're capable of being, which is
for a couple of
we're
dads, yeah, we'll take it.
we're doing great. And yeah, onwards and upwards.
And
So what?
Jay, we put a teaser out the last episode, so that's what, a week and a half ago. And we had some pretty good comments down below. Had some pretty decent guesses of people what they think's coming down. A few of them I think were pretty close, and so I guess
Couple
there's a
that
few
were not close
couple
at
that
all.
were, yeah, a little far
Made
out in
me
left
laugh.
field, but yeah, wishes would come true on some of those ones. But
And
yeah, so excited. You guys had some pretty good guesses there.
we didn't give any hints at all either, which is maybe
No.
unfair because so it's just like guess, and it's like guess what? Like, well,
Yeah.
guess. So
It's like my 5-year-old dad. Guess what? You'll never guess it because you have no idea what I'm
yeah,
thinking. So
yeah, it could be I have a snail in my pocket. Could be I got good grades. Could be I
yeah.
had ice cream last week. Right? Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So that snail in my pocket's true. By the way, my daughter has recently found out that she loves catching bugs and stuff and lizards, and she recently figured out that snails are pretty easy to find and also don't run away. So
Yes.
big snail catching phase to my wife's dismay.
Yeah. We've had a few snail races this summer at my house, so it's been fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, what are we going to talk about today? Speaking of
Hey,
catching things.
yeah. So we are gonna tackle the topic of catching birds. There's an art to it, there's strategy to it, and there's different ways that you can catch birds. And we've had quite a few people ask, you got big aviaries, how do you catch these birds? You have a loose bird in the house or outside, how do you catch them? So we're going to talk a little bit about that and catching birds and some of the things that went well for us and some of the things that did not.
Highs, lows, and everything in between.
The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. Bird Brains, Bird Brains. The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. Bird Brains, Bird Brains.
All right. So catching birds. I guess we're going to kind of break this up into three categories. So we're going to talk about catching birds in aviaries and cages. We're going to talk about catching loose birds inside, and then we're going to talk about escaped birds. God forbid, it's happened to me one time. If you keep outdoor birds, eventually, no matter how careful you are, the
Yeah.
stars will negatively align, and it'll happen. So we're going to talk about all three of those. But first, we're going to talk about, and I get asked this a lot. I know Chris does too. How do we catch birds in the aviary? And that actually very fitting for this week because I was Chris and I are in the middle of a bird swap. The birds are in
Yes.
transit as we
Hopefully
speak.
tomorrow morning, I guess when you guys see this, it'll be hopefully that day, I guess, if we post this pretty soon. So,
Yeah, and I'm traveling tomorrow, so my poor wife, on top of getting the kids to school and everything else, she's got to make a run over to the post office.
oh
But
no.
I got the holding cage all set up for her and everything, so she might have to do some bird catching though. So we'll see. But yeah, so as part of that, I was catching out. I'm sending a trio of spice finches over to Chris, and I was catching those, and I was texting Chris like, man, just I know I've told you 5 times already, but please, when you open that box, be ready because they are just missiles.
Yep, those suckers are so quick. And it's funny.
Yeah.
Some of the species of finches, a lot of your smaller like wax bills, man, the suckers are just so quick. But because they're so small, also they're really fragile. So
Mhm.
it's that fine line of how do I catch you and not injure you, but how do I be quick enough to be able to catch you? Because the birds are just so fast, and Yeah,
Right.
it's
And
a little
it's
bit of
it's
luck into that strategy.
it's also funny the birds that are not so good at getting away, like it takes me
Gouldian
less than a
finches
minute.
are so
Yeah.
slow.
Yeah,
Canaries, terribly slow.
Gouldians, canaries, but even like your diamond doves, they're just
Oh
like
yeah.
I often just
I was gonna say you could just grab them with your
yeah,
hand.
I often just hand grab them, especially if there's a window, they'll fly right to the window and then they're just in the window and the closer you get, the harder they try to peck through the window. And it's like, all right, well, I'll just catch you. Um, but yeah, so I guess let's start with this, Chris. So what's your primary, let's say when you're catching out babies in the aviary, what's your primary method?
Yeah, so I have a fairly large bird net, and maybe I can take a picture and send to you, Jay, and we can
Mhm.
show some of the nets that we use to catch our birds. My aviary is really big, and it's 13 feet tall. So my net has a little bit of a longer stick so that I can reach those top corners. Also, there's some strategy that goes into it. I have people come and they're like, your aviary is so big. How do you even catch these guys?" And then they see it, and I can actually catch them pretty quick. I've had a lot of practice, and they're really surprised. But there's some strategy to it, with my net, and it's really fine mesh because I have small finches. I don't want them to be able to fit through, and then it's really light so that it hopefully doesn't injure the birds when I capture them. Right, so it's very fine material, very light, but also big enough that I can catch them in these big spaces. I've got big branches that go every which way in the aviary, and so I strategically try to herd the birds into my one corner of my aviary that's the most open, and then I kind of take that net and I basically try to make it so they fly one direction, and then I intercept them really quick, and they usually fly into the net. Or if they're slow enough, like a canary or a Gouldian, if they're sitting on the wire, I can hurry and cover them. The spice finches, some of the wax bills, those birds are so quick. It takes me a few attempts to kind of slow them down a little bit, get them tired, and then I can catch them. I try to be as efficient as I can because I don't want to stress the birds out. That's not the goal. Is to make the birds as stress as possible and then capture them. I'm trying to do it in a way that is quick, easy, and least amount of stress on the birds for their health, and for their safety as well. And so that's some of the strategies that I use in the aviary to catch them in big spaces, kind of guide them to certain sections, and then lead them a certain direction, and try to intercept that really quick with the net in front of them, or capture them while they're hanging on the wire of the aviary. So that's usually my two best methods that I've chosen. How about you, Jay? What do you do in your aviary?
Yeah, so pretty similar. So I did build intentionally. My aviary is only 7 feet tall. And a big consideration of that was I want to be able to reach everywhere in the
Yeah,
aviary. And I don't know, the next one, when we got 3 kids now, we're talking about moving eventually. Um, the next, where my aviary is situated now, that was about the height that made sense anyway, but I guess I could have gone higher because I have that big attic space. But we'll see in the next one. Will I build taller also? Probably. Um, but yeah, right now, so I have I believe it's a 9-inch circle butterfly net.
yep,
And then, like we've talked about a million times, my aviary is set up for that long flight back and forth. So if I'm just going to catch a couple birds, I won't move everything out. But the main days when I'm like, okay, I'm going to catch out all the babies that have,
yeah,
fledged in the last month and a half and weaned and they're ready to come out, I'll um I'll wait till I'm cleaning and everything is pulled out so that I have kind of
nice,
minimal
nice.
stuff in my way that I could accidentally step on or whatever. And you got to be very careful not to step on the quail. But
Yeah,
yeah, I'll get them going back and forth, and then yeah, exactly like you, I kind of stand in the middle, and then I'll hold the net with one hand and kind of jerk my arm out, and they all fly. And I try to like before I do that, I try to say, okay, this time I'm going to catch this baby zebra finch,
yep,
and then I do it, and then I try to, and every once in a while I'll catch the wrong bird, or I'll catch two
yeah,
birds at the same time, or and then like we talked about some of the birds, like your waxbills and your spice finches, that some of them are agile enough to stop themselves in midair and turn around
Turn
back out of the
around.
net.
Yes.
So I try to really get it so they're going fast and do almost like a, the analogy for me is always like hockey goalie or lacrosse type move and
Right.
catch them. Um, and then, yeah, you can wear them out. I also, and you have the same problem in the summer, but I have to be very careful in the heat
Yes.
that I don't exhaust my birds and kill them from stress or heat exhaustion. So I'll do things like, let's say, like this past weekend, I had like 15 birds to catch out because I had that one massive clutch of zebras. It was seven. So I had like, just in zebra finches, I had like 12 I needed to catch.
Oh man.
So I caught like one or two, and then I went and did some of the other cleaning chores, and then I went back and caught like one or two, and so I was giving all the birds because like every bird ends up, you go in there with the net, and they all start getting agitated and moving, even the ones you're not trying to catch. So I try to take that smoothly and not give them, not kill a bird by accident or stress the
Yeah.
birds severely because I'm also in breeding season.
Right. I've seen another technique. I don't use it. I don't feel like it's as efficient and probably as safe for the birds. But I've seen folks that they'll get the birds flying in a direction and they'll kind of swoop the net behind the birds and kind of catch them that way. And sometimes that can injure the birds because it doesn't allow them to stop once they're in the net because it really catches them by surprise, and sometimes they can damage a wing or things like that. So if you do use that method, I would just say be careful, and you'd have to have bigger spaces. I do try to also, if my birds are in my big aviary, I have a window that they can fly inside the shed. If it's easier, I try to get them to fly in to the window into the smaller cage, and then I'll close the window. So then I have a smaller space to work with. It's a little bit less stressful. I can catch them a lot quicker that way. Um, but yeah, I think it's really, the intent is not to stress the birds out. We want to be as quick and as safe and efficient as we can. But there are times that you got to catch the birds, right? Whether it's to set them up for breeding, to catch them for just ship them across the U.S. like Jay and I are doing this week, or
Scat,
yeah, scat them, trim their nails. I mean, they're you've got to eventually be able to catch bird, and we're talking aviary.
sick
Those are
birds
some of
too
the
is another one.
yes, yes, sick birds. So that's kind of the big aviary scenario. How about the smaller cages, Jay? Say you've got a small breeding cage and you need to catch your birds.
Well, I was going to add one more thing to the big birds and Tony Arnold. If Bones Birds on YouTube and Instagram, he has some great videos. Maybe 6 months ago. You have to scroll a little bit, but so he has massive aviaries. Like he has one
Yeah,
aviary that's 10 meters tall, which is like 35 feet tall,
that's awesome.
and so there's no net that works for that, right? I mean, you'd have to have
Right.
like a net gun. So but in that cage, he has like 50 breeding pairs or more. So he basically he has this really cool, it kind of looks like a or a crab trap, and it's a big circle with entrances, and he just puts a bunch of millet and fresh grass seed, and then the birds can get in but can't get out, and then he basically he's able to like has a little small door and he's able to open it, grab out the ones he wants, and then just release the ones he didn't
Yeah.
want. Um,
Which yeah, then that's probably I would say your only option in a cage that big. I mean, you can try and catch them with a net, but then again, you're not going to be very successful. You're just going to stress the birds out like crazy because you're going
yeah,
to be
you're
chasing
gonna
them around for an hour, and then it's going to do more damage than good. So I mean, I would say that's a best practice technique there for those large cages, and probably the least amount of stress that you could cause on a bird
right, and
that
yeah, and
way.
I was gonna say, if you got time or you're not in a huge rush or you don't have a crowded aviary, and you've got to get the birds out, and you can basically not afford, but you're able to say like, okay, well, I didn't catch that one, I'll catch them next week, that kind of
Yeah,
thing. That's ideal. Is the trap? I don't know if they ever get wise to the trap. I don't know how frequently he uses it, so that's another thing to consider.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, okay, so small cages, especially wire cages, scare the crap out of me when I'm catching birds. So let me start with that. I so many times I've seen birds get their wing through the bars or their
yeah,
head
or
through the
their head.
bars.
Hmm.
So the first thing I say is I would rather take longer to catch the bird than catch the bird the first try. So usually most bird cages have like two openings at least.
Yeah.
Where like most of mine either have two openings or they have two like where the food cups can go in and you can kind of just barely get your arm in. So kind of like you've seen like scientists working on like diseases with those rubber gloves through the thing or whatever. I'll try to stick my hands one in each side and then kind of try to work them to a corner and
Yep.
then gently reach down and grab them. And if they get out of my hand, I don't try to press harder or just grab what
Yeah.
I can. I just kind of let them go again
Yep.
and then try again. So that, I mean, that's my small cage method. Um,
And
Another
I would,
option.
I was
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
going to say, I think it's important in that one, Jay. I use slower movements and motions. Don't
Oh
just
yeah.
slam your hand on them because that's when you're going to injure the bird.
Hmm.
Slow motions, I mean, it's going to, that one's a little bit more strategic and letting the birds tire out a little bit more. But I think in that case, it's better because then it's easier to grab the bird gently without injuring their wing or their foot or their head. I mean, I've seen some breeders in the past. I mean, when they grab these finches out of the cage, I mean, they're literally like slamming their hands on them. I'm like, dude, you're going to kill the bird, and now you're giving it to me, you know.
Right after you
And so
bopped it on the head. Yeah.
right. And so, yeah, just being careful and as gentle as you can. I mean, you get some of those small birds that can fit their head through those wires, like you said, Jade, scares the crap out of you, and you really have to be super gentle in how you handle them. But yeah, slow motions. I mean, eventually you're going to get them, and when you do the slow motions, you actually can get closer to the birds because you're not scaring them as much and making those jerky motions that's going to make them fly around.
Yeah, it's more of like an ambush predator type thing,
Correct.
than it is a quick grab with the net. And then another technique that I've used in the past, especially if you have indoor birds in like smaller cages, that works great. You can if you can take them in like your bathroom or somewhere that doesn't have windows and turn the lights off and just
Mm-hmm.
have like a headlamp or a flashlight. If the lights go off, the birds tend to kind of freeze and you're able to kind of just grab them.
Yep.
Or if you have a real small closet or something that doesn't have a bunch of stuff in it, you can cut them loose intentionally. Then you're able to net them pretty easily, and
Yep.
you avoid the risk of smushing them in the cage or get them getting hung up in the bars or anything.
Yep.
So that'd be another way I'd recommend doing it. I mean, that's how they catch like chickens out of chicken houses, is they just cut the lights off slowly, and the birds will just naturally move to the light, and then eventually they're all in one side.
Yeah.
Um, so those are other good options. Just yeah, the if when you're catching birds out of cages, be very careful. That is a dangerous situation.
Yeah. And I've caught birds at nighttime too, and you have to be a little bit careful. There's got to be enough light so you can see what's going on. But usually they're in more of a sleep trance, and you can get pretty close to them. And if that initial grab, if you can grab them, I mean, that it's usually really quick, and they don't fly away, and it's pretty calm and at least not very stressful on the birds. So that's an option too. You just have to be careful. If you do have some birds that are a little bit more flighty than others, and then they start flying around in the dark, then they could get injured. So you got to have enough light on there so you can see what you're doing and the bird can see where it's flying if it gets away. But many times, like my borks, they're super like motionless when I walk in late at night, and I can easily grab them. And same with the Gouldian finches. So, um, what about have you? I've got a few. Unfortunately, just this last week, I had a bad case, a bad example of catching a bird. And it wasn't necessarily that my technique was bad, it just was the stars aligned and it ended up bad for the bird, to say the least. Um, have you had any horror stories or learning moments, Jay, that we can educate to?
Yeah, I've got a couple I can think of. Maybe we should alternate. So I last year before, was trying to catch a zebrafin. So every year after the breeding season, I'll just explain this. I catch every single bird out of the aviary, and I do it twice in 3 weeks because I scat everybody. So to um, and I still do S76 some years, but generally once a year I catch everybody after breeding season, get a look at everybody's condition, check everybody's band, check everybody's feet, clip nails that need to be clipped, every kind of like a, okay, we're done breeding, now what? And it's also helpful because that ends up happening in the late fall, so it's cooler. Um, and then the other times I've had to do it, every time it's happened once every winter so far. We've had a really, really serious cold snap at the end of December, beginning of January, and I've had to move everybody inside. So I chase as many birds as I can into the inside, but then at some point, some birds are never going to go in, like
Yeah.
spice finches. They're just never going to
Right.
do what you want. So
Okay.
you close, I close the window, and then I got to catch the rest out. Um, and last year, the year before, I guess the year before, I was trying to catch one of my zebra hens, and I don't really understand exactly what happened, but I caught her. Everything seemed fine, and then I went to put her down on the inside, and she flipped on her back, and her legs were kicking, and she was kind of like scooting across the floor on her back, if that makes sense, and her wings just didn't work. And eventually, I realized that somehow or another her neck got broken, and it was interesting because I'm not, by no means am I a human or animal doctor, but my basic understanding of the animal of human and animal nervous systems is it's the lower you go, you control lower stuff. So like on a human, you can break your neck low or your back low and your legs won't work, but you still have your arms. So it's interesting to me that her wings didn't work anymore, but her legs still did. But I don't know. But yeah, so, and I unfortunately ended up having to, I gave her like a day trying to see it. And I actually, I took a food cup and just placed her in it so she'd be upright. And then she'd flip herself out of it in the night, but she just eventually I ended up having to euthanize her, unfortunately. A young hen, like a 2-year-old hen,
Yeah.
just kind of a freak thing. I've got some other ones too, but you go for one.
Yeah. So, week and a half ago, and it just made me sick. I mean, unfortunately, very similar scenario as yours, Jay. So one of my best breeder male starfinch got out of his cage, and I was trying to catch him. He was in a breeder cage, and it was early morning. I was late for work. I was a little rushed trying to catch him. And, it's one of those where he's super healthy. He's 2 years old, really fast bird. And
Hmm.
so I'm trying to guess his judgment of where he's going to fly and intercept him really quick so he flies into the net. And he was kind of higher up. This was inside my shed. He's kind of higher up, between the wire and the ceiling. And so I kind of went, and then he went to fly, and I went to jerk in front of him to catch him. And he flew up, and I caught the bottom rim of the net
Yeah.
on his neck, and then the ceiling just
Yeah.
popped his neck. I mean, and it was he just instantly dropped and died, and I was just like sick to my stomach. I'm like, you gotta be freaking kidding me. I felt so bad. So it's like in that instance, it wasn't necessarily that I was being too harsh. I just was impatient and tried to intercept the bird too quick. I probably could have been a little bit more gentle and waited for him to be a little bit lower, on the wire to be able to catch him. That's the first time I've ever done that, so it's not something that happens. And yeah, I just was sick to my stomach. So he's actually the starfinch chick that you have is prodigy of this male, and he's a freaking stud. So hopefully you'll get a good baby there. But
Well,
yeah,
hopefully I
so
can send some back to you. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, super bummed, just heartbreaking.
yeah, that kind of stuff just happens. I mean, it's just part of the deal. It stinks. Yeah, so I've got two other pretty bad ones. So one kind of similar to that. I don't even remember. This is years ago in high school. I don't remember what species this was, but um, I had a bird get loose in my room, was chasing him with the net. Similar thing. Tried to net it, and I guess yeah, it must have hit the circle, and I went to net it out of the air, and I ended up basically batting it out of the
Mm-hmm.
air like
Mm-hmm.
violently, and it just slammed into the hardwood floor, and that was it. And then I've had two other really bad ones. I had one that um, went into a ceiling fan,
Yep.
um,
I've had a
with
couple of
ceiling
those.
fans and birds,
And
and
windows.
especially a finch. And then I had another one got loose in my house. I was chasing it, went into my bathroom, couldn't find it, toilet.
Ah, no.
Yeah, and actually that bird lived, but it was close. You know, I was able to get it, but it because once they get in the toilet, they don't have any purchase, so they can't really swim, so they just kind of
Yeah.
start to drown.
Yep.
And so it was like half drowned. It was bad, but a little water birding of water birding. There you go. I
Yeah.
accidentally made a good joke. So PSA: if you're doing this stuff in a bathroom or near a bathroom, uh, close the toilet. Um,
Yes.
and then the other thing too is just like whatever room you're in, and we'll talk about escapes here in a second. We'll talk about double doors, but whatever room you're in working with birds, like just shut the door too. That helps a
Yep.
ton. And if you have a big gap between the bottom of your door and the next room, block that too. Because I've had
Yep.
more than once the bird get there and they just go right underneath like a mouse because they're
Yep.
flying
Just
mice.
just put a towel under there. If you
Hmm.
could cover up your mirror, do that. They will fly into your mirrors. If you have windows and you have a blind over the window, close the blind.
Yeah, all
So
that.
just turn your fan off so they don't whack it. Just simple things. And I'd probably say, when you're handling the bird, you've caught them, you're handling them. There's a couple different methods that you can use to properly handle them. Finches that are smaller, I usually kind of cup my hand like this as I'm catching them, wait for their head to come through, and then kind of close down a little bit. So I have their head sticking out here and their bodies in the hand. So you can do that way, or others will kind of have them on their back and put their head through these two fingers and their bodies there, so you kind of hold them the body that way. I know a
Hmm.
lot of larger parrots, that's how they hold them so that they can't turn and bite them. And you can do that on finches. I get a little bit more nervous that way because I don't feel like I have as much control of the body and I don't want to break the neck. Whereas this way, it's a little bit more control. At least I'm more comfortable that way in handling the birds. So just a few simple tricks to be able to handle them. Then it's easier to band them, or it's easier to give them medications, or clip their nails, or clip their beaks. Because you have access to the underparts and their head in that scenario. And so, just a few ways to handle them properly. Make sure their wings are closed up, you know, to their body, so they're not stretched out and can get injured in any way.
Hmm.
That I've seen a lot of birds get injured because they just don't have their wings in and they're trying to flap their wings as they're holding their body, and then it ends up breaking a wing or just straining them or spraining them, things like that. So just a couple techniques there that you can look at when you're handling the birds after you've caught them.
Yeah, and remember, bird bones are hollow.
Yeah,
So think about like the leg of a finch is so small and it's hollow. So the bone is just nothing.
it's just like a little
Um,
straw.
yeah, so just be very, very careful. And another thing you kind of remind me of, Chris, so like a lot of times what I'll do if I'm clipping nails or so you kind of have three classes of birds for handling, right? So you have your finches, real small, then you have kind of your medium size, or I guess still most people would call them small parrots, but to me it's a medium sized bird because I have really small birds. It's like your budgies, your teals,
Yeah.
your
Mm-hmm.
borks. If I'm going to clip their nails or anything like that, I'll often leave them in the net
Yeah.
and kind of use the net like you would a towel on a big parrot and just expose their feet or whatever I'm trying to work on, and keep their wings bound up next to them.
Yeah.
And so I always, however I'm holding them, I always want to try to keep their wings bound against them so that you don't injure a wing. And then for the big parrots, like for Einstein, he gets like a full towel straight jacket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so those things. And then I guess, again, yeah, just super fragile. Everything's fragile. Go slow. And I also say when I'm holding a bird to clip their nails or something, if I feel like they're starting to get loose and they're about to get loose, I'll let them go
Yeah.
and re-catch them because the last thing you want to do is like it's like in Boy Scouts if you're whittling with a knife and you drop your knife, you don't try to catch the knife because then you'll cut your hand. You just let the knife go and then pick it up off the ground, right? So
Yeah.
same thing with birds. If they're about to get loose, don't try to maintain some weird awkward grip where their wing will get pinched or something. Just cut them loose, catch them with the net again, or however you're going to catch them again. That's the safer way to do it. All right, catching escaped birds. So
Oh, yeah. You've got a couple good stories on that, and I've got
I,
one that I can share.
I've
So
got, I've really only got the one. Well, it's a combo. It's one event, two birds got loose. So, and um, so I was off. I was about an hour and a half away working on something, and my wife called me and she said, "Hey, you have two birds loose." And I was like, "No way," because I have my whole aviary is double metal screen, and then there's a door to the inside shed, and then there's the shed door that's all blocked off. I mean, there's just no, well, like we talked about in the climate control episode, the top of my shed is open. So when I first made it the bird shed, I put just like mosquito netting around all those openings. Well, it's all metal now because of this story. So a rat crawled up the side of the shed and chewed through on one side. And it was a pretty big rat. I ended up catching the rat too. It was like a 4 pound rat. So the hole
jeez.
was maybe 4 inches in diameter. And it's one of those things where like the screen isn't super tight. So like you had to really look. Like after I caught these birds, it took me a long time to figure out how they got loose in the first place. So, and then the same rat chewed through on the inside. So there were two openings to make this happen. So, of course, one of my orange cheek waxbill pairs, who I still have today, spoiler alert, I caught them, got out through the bottom of the outside aviary into the shed and then out through the top of the shed. And the way that my wife knew they were mine, because every once in a while I'll get like wild birds will come by and eat spilled seed or see what just they're attracted to the birds. And so that's the first thing I said to my wife is, "How do you know they're mine?" Like, no way. She sent me a picture and she's like, "So my daughter, my 4-year-old said, those are daddy's birds." And my wife was like, "No way." And then she looked and she saw the bands. She's like, "Oh crap. Okay." So my orange cheek waxbill pair got out and one of my two pairs. And so I rushed home, dropped what I was doing. We're rushed home got home at like 1 a.m. And I slowly, quietly walked out to the aviary. And luckily my hen was asleep on the outside of the aviary, just at like chest height. So I was able to just like talk about in the dark. I was literally able to just walk up and grab her.
Mm.
So then I had her, and then the whole next day I was watching the male fly over to the aviary, fly back into the bushes in my yard, fly over into a tree over there, come back. So I said, okay, he's still around. And you worry about predators and all those things. But so what I ended up doing, and there's video of it if you scroll back through my Instagram and my YouTube, was um, I rigged up a cage with her right on the inside of my aviary. I didn't want to put her back outside, even in the cage. It just gave me the heebie-jeebies, especially because orange cheek waxbills are so small they can sometimes squeeze through bars. So she was in the vicinity, and then I put Millet in the cage. Is one of those rectangle cages with like the big center door. So I
Oh
put
yeah.
Millet on either side with a really long rope holding it open. Finally, he went in, and the first time I dropped the door, he actually flew back out. So I had Millet in the middle. So I was like, okay, I moved the Millet to the side, so he had to kind of go in and turn a little, and I caught him. And then I sealed off the aviary like crazy. And since then, I put like 50 pounds of concrete and a ton more screen. I've just made it as proof as possible. But double doors always. I have my friend Joanna. I don't know if she watches these, but I sent her some birds earlier this year, and unfortunately, she didn't have double doors yet. She's since built them, but and one of her birds it was sleeping, and this happened to Rancel at Paradise Aviary. It's a pretty common thing that happens. A bird is sleeping right by the door or sitting right by the door,
Yep.
and you don't realize it, and you open the aviary and out they
Gone.
go.
Yep.
So that double door, even if you just have like just enough like a phone booth size where you can walk in,
Yep.
close it behind you, and then turn around and open it, is a 100%. I would never have an aviary without a double door system.
Yeah. Which is what I have now, and I
Mhm.
haven't lost a bird because yeah, it's foolproof, or it's at least double proof, right? Maybe not
Right.
foolproof, but and then My last aviary, I didn't have double doors. I lost three birds. And funny enough, all three of them were Goulian finches, of course, but I also had a perch right by the entrance of my door. So they would just be there and I'd open the door and they just swoop down and out. The odds of you catching a bird if they escape, I would say are like 2%. I
Yeah, I
mean,
got so lucky. And the only
yeah,
reason I caught the second one, I'm convinced, is because I had his mate
right.
and the pair
Yeah.
bond.
If
Otherwise,
if the bird sticks around your aviary, you've got a decent chance and you can set a cage out like what you did, Jay. My three birds that escaped, I mean, they were gone. I mean, I just watched them fly into the distance and disappear, and I never saw them again. I have had other people's birds that have escaped. I've had a couple budgier parakeets and a zebra finch that had escaped from someone's house and found
showed
my
up.
aviary. Yep, they showed up on the outside of my aviary. Though the crazy thing is the zebra finch actually flew into my garage, so I just closed my garage door and caught it that way. I was like, "Thank you." And then the two parakeets that showed up, they had been out for at least a couple days. They were a little weaker. I mean, they were pretty skinny. They were, needed some food, and so they were a little bit easier to catch. They weren't as fast. I had growing up, we had my dad had a bunch of lovebirds, and one night we had a raccoon that got into the aviary, bit a big, huge hole into the wire. And we had probably like five lovebirds that escaped that night. And luckily, where I grew up, we had two other bird breeders within about a 2 block distance, and they had lots of birds, big aviaries. And our lovebirds found their cages, and how the one guy caught his because the it was a few days after the lovebirds had got out. He's like, they were super quick. I mean, they were in pretty good condition. He had to soak them with a hose, like a jet hose. He's like, I just
Yeah.
wait for him to land on the wires, and I would just drown them. It's like that's the only way that I caught him, and he actually caught three of our six that escaped and brought them back to our house. But the other ones we never found. But yeah, the odds of you catching a bird once they escape into the wild are really slim. So it's like you said, Jay, just be smart, do your homework, right? Have double doors, double net your aviary. If you have windows, things like that, make sure you have screens on them if you don't want birds to be flying through them, etc. Just make sure that if a child, go through, if a child or an animal can get in, they will eventually. And so just trying to think ahead and foolproof those areas, those weak points as best as you can to keep your birds as safe as possible.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. Do some, don't take it for granted that everything's good
Yeah,
all the time. So like
yeah,
when I clean the aviary or really whenever I'm in there, I'll do things like especially check like the corners.
uh-huh,
I just kind of look around and see if I notice anything. And like I'll give a recent example. So I had the other a couple weeks ago, I walked in the aviary and there were three newborn baby mice on the floor of the aviary, and it was like, so that tells me two things, right? So one, a mouse can get in, and
yeah.
two, that mouse got back out because I don't see mama. So, and look, if you have water and birdseed, you have mice that are at least interested, and
Absolutely.
rats. So,
And
and you think, oh,
snakes.
there aren't, yeah, and you think there aren't any of those around you? There are mice everywhere. There are people and
Yeah,
rats. So,
yeah,
um, so I ended up finding the hole and filling it with concrete. But and it was actually like underneath, so I don't think the birds would go down through a tunnel, but I think they'd have to see daylight on the other
yeah,
side. So I didn't have any escape or anything, but so just always, if you see like mouse poop in your aviary and you're like, oh, how'd that get in here? Well, a mouse got in and pooped. So
yeah.
look and figure out how that happened.
Right.
Um, it's just part of the deal, especially with outdoor bird keeping, but really any bird keeping, you're going to have a bird that gets loose in some form or fashion. So if you're set up to where it can't get fully loose, you're in good shape.
Yeah, and I would probably say I know we need to wrap this up, Jay. The last thing that I'll say, and it doesn't necessarily go with catching the birds, but it is part of it. Your smaller finches, anything that's not a hookbill, don't clip its wings, please. Um, Sometimes people clip their wings so that they're easier to handle and they want to tame them down. Finches don't necessarily tame down. Maybe a canary or a Java potentially could if it's hand fed or things like that. They have some of those capabilities. But if you clip their wings, you basically render them helpless. They can't climb up the wires like a hookbill does. Like
Yeah, they don't have
they
the
can't
extra
grab
hand.
exactly. And I would even say try not to clip your larger bird's wings as well. But I also know there's more benefit in that one if you have it in as a house pet or you take it outside and it's not flight trained. There are some safety things there that I know people will disagree with me, but I'm okay with clipping their wings in some of those cases to keep the bird safe. But finches don't do that because now they're just stuck on the ground until they molt again, and it could be a full year until they molt again. So they're featherless, or flightless for a long time, and that could do some pretty damaging things to their health. So don't clip their wings to make it easier for them to be caught. Just try and find a better strategy, whether it's a bigger net or a type of cage that's easier to catch the birds, or find someone that can catch the birds for you if you don't feel comfortable with it. There's other options than clipping the bird's wings.
Yep, yep. I completely agree. I have one bird that's clipped. That's Einstein. Um, he is molting right now, so I've noticed some clipped flight feather, and I got him clipped. Some clipped flight feathers I've seen in the bottom of his cage this week. So now I'm starting to decide, and I am harness training Einstein. So I'm trying to decide if I want to let him be flighted or not for safety. So some considerations, because I do take him, he just rides around on my shoulder all the time. So
Yeah,
that's a big different thing. But I've never clipped a finch. I will never clip a finch.
yeah,
Um, they're, you know, the big parrots have two claws forward, two claws back. Finches are three and one. They're not built for climbing. They don't have a beak for climbing. It'd be the same thing as like breaking a kid's leg so he can't walk. I mean, they have to be able to fly. So yeah, I think that's all good. This is all good advice. If somebody had more questions, Chris, how could they find you?
yeah. Reach out. All things bird nerds for Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and we have actually had quite a few new people reaching out, Jay, which is awesome.
Me
I love
too, getting
that.
a bunch.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. I appreciate it, and apologize if it's a day or two before I get back to you guys. But I love the interactions with. I love your questions. I love being able to share advice as best as I can. So please, yeah, reach out to me, Bird Nerd, for all three of those platforms. Instagram is Bird Nerd 4. All of them have the same logo to find me. So please reach out to me. I love to get that feedback and to talk to you guys. How about you, Jay? How can they get a hold of you?
Well, and I want to say too, I'm just curious. So, I talked to somebody from northern Spain that was a listener that reached out for the first time today, and I know we've done Australia, Europe, um, Canada. I'd love to hear, if you're a listener and you're listening and you haven't commented before, whatever. I'd love just hop in the comments. I'd love to just see where everybody is. That's so cool to me to talk to people all over the world and share the love of this
Absolutely.
hobby. So
Yes,
comment
please do.
below. Tell us where you live. If you want to add, and I keep these birds or whatever, that's cool too. But, if you're listening and you're still here, love to know where you're listening from. And even if you're in the States,
Yeah.
give us a city and a state. Let us know where you're at. And you can find me I'm the Javiary. It's THE_JAYVIARY. Or sometimes in certain cases, I don't have the underscore, but one of those or the other. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, obviously YouTube. I'm on Threads, which sucks, and I'm on Reddit. So shoot us a DM, comment, ask us questions. We're doing this for the love of the game. We love helping everybody. Um, and yeah, if you come back on Friday, which this video will be on my channel, Friday's video will be on Chris's channel, and we'll have our hopefully have our big announcement.
Ba-dum-bum-bum. Yes, hopefully.
Mhm.
That'd be great.
All right, well, that's it for this one. Thanks, y'all. We'll catch you in the next one.
See you guys.